Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. It's great to see that digital asset. Oh, there we go. Yes, Eric warned me about that. I'm Dan Dennehy, Head of Visual Resources at Minneapolis Institute of Arts. Thanks for coming. It's good to see that asset management is still a hot topic. So it's a little over a decade now since museums began creating enough digital media to start looking seriously at asset management. And while everyone out of necessity developed their own local file storage tracking systems, some of us invested early in DAM software systems, and I think it's safe to say we got on a pretty steep learning curve in the early days. And now we're at the point where we all have a better understanding of what it takes to create and maintain a flexible image repository that integrates into broader museum information networks and support our larger goals of research and storytelling. And as the terabytes of information grow with the adoption of computational imaging and photogrammetry in particular, good DAM is more important and critical than ever. So I'm happy to have joining me three colleagues who work at organizations that are taking their second or even third stab at digital asset management. We have Kristin Britanik here from the Warhol Museum, our host from last night. Mr. Urban, whose name?
Richard.
Richard, of course. I've known Richard for 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
Richard Urban from the Corning Museum of Glass, and Peter Bueker from the National Gallery. So we'll be hearing from them. I'm filling in. We were also going to have Josh Lynn, digital media specialist from Minneapolis Institute of Arts, but they had a baby a couple of weeks ago, and he couldn't tear himself away from his beautiful new daughter. Okay, so I'm going to get it started with our presentation, Fixing the Holes. So, we've all been in this situation where we're driving a car, it's breaking down, sometimes you think it's a lemon, and you never really know when you want to get rid of it and buy a new one and when you want to keep fixing it. And that's kind of how we were with MediaBin, which is one of the first big asset management systems that museums started buying into about 10 years or so ago. But we looking around at the lot, we didn't see any other cars that we wanted to buy at the time. They were all pretty much the same, and we were waiting for the next thing. We were waiting for that self-driving car to come along. So what we did was we substantially improved our existing DAM system, and we improved the performance by kind of assessing all the pain points and making some practical decisions, and really realizing that a lot of what was going wrong with the system was easy. It was always easy to blame the DAM, but when we looked honestly at it, we were making some serious mistakes in how we were implementing it. So it was a complicated piece of software. So we chose instead to leverage a decade worth of accumulated knowledge and overhaul the system following sound principles of information technology and library science. And through a concerted team effort, we focused on rebuilding the back-end infrastructure and analyzing and revising the SQL processes, streamlining the deployment strategy, and building a custom metadata specification that we call MIA Core. And I'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. So here, just a little background. I'm going to take the mic for this. So no, I better not. So you can see we purchased MediaBin in 2005. We started with about 30,000 collection assets. We went through various iterations as content grew. And the product actually was bought out 3 times. It went from MediaBin to Autonomy to Virage. HP owned it for a while. And then in 2016, when we did our latest upgrade, it was purchased by OpenText, which is another big player in the asset management space. We felt comfortable that they knew what they were doing. So, our ecosystem, our environment and system integration, simple. Marry assets with metadata and share them across our TMS, our collection management system, our DAM, and our CMS before we share it with the community. And then I don't know if who's familiar with the DAM maturity model. Do you know that? It's a great thing. You should look that up if you're not. It's a way of sort of assessing your readiness for DAM at various stages. And it looks at some of the requirements, in terms of people and infrastructure and processes that you need to be familiar with. And we kind of moved our way up the ladder in this last, from a formative state to approaching an optimal state, just by really looking at what we were doing, and not so much what the software was doing. So I'm going to kind of do this looking back, thinking forward thing, where I'm going to point out some of our mistakes. It wasn't always all mistakes. We made some good decisions too. But looking back at that first implementation, we kind of let the vendor do his thing. We thought they knew best, and we were new at this. And so then we also kind of used hardware that we had. And that was not such a great idea. Our team was actually operating in silos across divisions, and it wasn't very effective. And we thought of implementation as kind of a one-time event. They come in, set it up, leave, and it just all works wonderfully. Well, it wasn't quite exactly like that. So the next time around, we really, in this recent implementation, we really assumed ownership. We expanded our in-house expertise in the process. We installed on all new, clean, robust hardware, and we worked really hard at paring down and improving our metadata model. We partnered more internally and with the vendor, and we thought of this implementation not just as a one-time thing, but a continuous process, an iterative process of learning that we knew we were going to have to keep working this thing beyond just the implementation stage. So in terms of the environment, when we're looking back, when I say the requirements are unclear, I don't mean we knew what we wanted to do, but we didn't really know how we wanted to set it up. And we relied on the vendor. And we just went by their basic infrastructure recommendations because that was what was affordable at the time. But we also were in like a multi-purpose environment. So we had, our IS server was shared between TMS and MediaBin, and we had like our time, hours, what do you call that, the salary time clock software on there. And there were all these, dependencies that didn't work with each other. Like one version of Java worked on one system, so we couldn't upgrade for the other system, and that was a mistake. And it was inflexible. We weren't able to provision resources quickly as we would have liked to. So the next time we determined the requirements very proactively with the vendor. We talked with them. We talked to their engineers. We looked really extensively at the documentation, and we asked a lot of questions. And then we went out and we required the most robust hardware that we could afford and really set it up to perform. And we virtualized everything too. So if we needed to, we needed more RAM somewhere, we could do it, and without having to go out and buy a new box. And we realized too that it required regular tuning. It's not something that you can just drive without getting under the hood every once in a while. So looking back at our folder architecture, we made a typical mistake where you take an analog way of thinking and you put it into a digital process. And we started with lots and lots of folders because that made sense to everybody. It was with collection objects. And we basically, for every record in TMS, we created a folder in the DAM. Well, that created, it was easy for everybody to understand how that worked, but it created not a very good search experience, especially when your search results showed up folders that didn't have anything in them because a lot of the stuff in the collection was not photographed yet. So the second time around, we said, forget folders. We don't want to use folders as metadata anymore. We're just going to use metadata for all our searching and sorting. Well, we discovered that at that time, we just went to a few simple basic buckets. And we discovered that, like with any system, if you put too many things in one folder, you're gonna hit performance pretty hard. So we had to find that sweet spot of how many assets could actually go into a folder before performance started to take a hit. So in this recent one, we sort of sorted it out. We found out around 1,000 assets per folder was where we had the optimum performance on the system. So we tuned it for that. We mapped the folder structure to an external cache that we had for sharing with TMS and the web, and we significantly improved the performance. So the metadata model, this is a big one. Now, we had a bloated metadata model. We were taking everything that we knew about anything and putting it into the DAM, and it wasn't necessary. We were trying to make it into a collection management system too. So we kind of pared that down. We looked at a lot of standards and came up with our own specification. We were packing fields, especially keywords. We were putting way too many things in keywords, and it was making search difficult. We didn't have enough workflow metadata. What we were having was we were having high recall, a lot of hits, but low precision, which is frustrating for the user when you get a lot of things that aren't really what you're looking for. So this last time, we looked at all the schema out there, Dublin Core, XMP, IPTC, Prism, and we kind of cherry picked what we needed to do our business, and we created our own specification mapped to standards. And we only built local fields when necessary. Of course, MediaBin didn't have all the object information, works of art data that we needed, so we created fields based on VRA core. We mapped anything we wanted to bring over from TMS into VRA core, and then created those fields in MediaBin. We took a multifaceted, multimedia approach. So we thought about video, we thought about audio, and we used the XMP fields that are created just for that type of media. And we kept it to a minimal set. We kind of thought of it, you see this Lego idea. We said we can always add pieces and take them away as we need it, especially if we're mapped to standards. We're not making this up, we're just using what we need at any given time. So, all right, and looking back on the automation, well, we had a lot of updating, an insane amount of updates from TMS. We were creating a lot of revisions on this system. And we were having a lot of recaching too. Like when the web team wanted to refresh things, suddenly we'd turn MediaBin on one day and we would find out without knowing that like 30,000 things are being updated. And that would be a problem for the users who just wanted to go in and get a PowerPoint slide, right? So, because our extended environment was more of a black box, so everybody was working in silos, and we didn't really understand how the media cache outside of the system was structured, and so it made it difficult. And there was some metadata stripping, which for the developers was easy just to rip everything off, rather than get into these situations where bunk metadata causes a problem and it becomes hard to figure out. So. We would say it was more reactive dam management. Something would happen and then we'd spend, months trying to figure out what it was, rather than just really monitoring the system. So in the new way we do it, like dams is the authority for media assets, right? So that's anything that flows out of the dam, and if it decides what goes where. So we can choose select derivatives to go to to the web, and then select derivatives to go to TMS, because they don't always match up. Some things we don't want the public to see, of course, and some things we do. And that was a problem in the old system, sorting that out. We overhauled the metadata sync process. We completely retooled our publication and syndication process. We used a tool, we kind of dusted off a tool that MediaBin had called the deployment agent, which allowed us to schedule deployments. So before, the web team was going in and hitting MediaBin directly. And now we said, we want to control the media cache. We want to provide you with a cache that we can say is the definitive cache. Everything's right in there. And if we need to go in, a picture, someone calls us and says, this artwork's upside down, we can go in and change that, and then the web team knows that that cache is correct. And then we scheduled the maintenance tasks. We made a big Google Calendar of all the maintenance tasks. Everybody knew when something was going to be updated, or when something needed to be, when we needed to check the capacity of a particular part of the system. Before we were doing kind of ad hoc cleanup where the roles were not really clear, and we had limited documentation of, a limited understanding of the vendor's documentation, and limited documentation of our own practices too. We weren't really using the support contract as much as we really should have been. Sometimes we were calling the guy back who came in to do the implementation. But that's not like using the support contract where everything gets logged and people are responsible for making sure that your problem gets solved. And I have to say that the new vendor OpenText has been really good with that. So we started practicing more proactive dams management. We created these reconciliation audits in SQL where we look and make sure that TMS and media bin are in sync with their data, and you know, if there's a primary image, they both know which one it is, and we can sort of like sort out any duplication or duplicate primaries and that kind of thing. And we daily monitor the system performance. You know, we look at the media module, and we watch the CPU usage, and we track what's going on in the system, so we know when we're going to, you know, need to throw more resources at something. And we really improved our local documentation. So now, like, if any of the IT team goes onto the server, the first thing that pops up is the documentation, so they know what's going on and what's been done the last time somebody was there. And we really extended the knowledge base that we had. So in conclusion, you know, whether your glass is half full or half empty, or you're just going to make some lemonades with the lemons you have, I would say that the first thing to think about is DAMS is more than software. It's a system of processes and practices that really first start in changing some of the habits around the organization. It's a new way of thinking about how we use media. You have to understand your limits and resources. So you have to know your DAM maturity, know what you're capable of doing, know where you need to go get some help if you don't have all of the resources. And you know, let it be DAM, let it be itself. Don't expect it to be more than it is. It's not a collection management system, and so you don't need to recreate every piece of data that you know about inside your DAM. It should really be workflow metadata and media-related metadata, and you can have some object metadata too that enhances searching. But it's also more than just a static archive and a vending machine where you go put a coin in and something comes out. You have to really think of it as a workflow tool. And so I would also advise people to avoid customizations. I think it's better to change your own practices to fit the DAM than to try to you know, have all this customization that you're getting the DAM to adapt to what you're doing. I think there has to be a compromise, but customization is expensive, and of course it's never carries over to the next upgrade. Set achievable goals, and keep in mind that it will grow faster than you expected. So you know, be ready to scale up. So I think that's all I have to do. So let me turn it over to Kristin. Let's see, do this and then do that. I'll even open you up here. There we go. I'll leave you this.
All right. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm kind of an outlier in this panel in that I snuck in, and really this is our first implementation of a DAM. But I think a lot of the things we had to go through and the processes we went through will also be helpful for anyone either looking to get their first DAM or kind of revisiting their current workflows, because sometimes I think you kind of have to re-examine from the beginning to kind of get a better understanding. So this, I'm going to kind of go over the history of digital assets at the Warhol and how we try to tame our digital chaos, as we like to call it. So like I was saying, we just implemented our first formal DAM from 2015 and 2016. Before that, our images were stored on a restricted network file server that was linked to our collections database, TMS. They were all in one folder. We had one folder for the master TIFF files, which were super restricted. Not really anyone could get to them. And then the internal, like, all-purpose use JPEGs, which were linked to TMS, are in another folder, which is also pretty restricted. And here's the part where I have to tell you about our unique collection. So hopefully all of you got to go to the Warhol last night and you saw all the beautiful works up there. Well, we own the copyright to maybe 5 things that were hanging last night, and they were all little photographs. So we don't own the copyright to most of the things in our collection. The Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts owns the copyright to Warhol artworks, and we have a partnership with them, but they're a separate entity, and they have specific restrictions for putting images online, digital use, what you can and can't do with the collections images of Warhol artworks. And then in addition to our Warhol art collection, we also have a very large archival collection. It's estimated over 500,000 objects, but you know, Warhol collection is kind of weird, so even a paperclip is an object for one reason. So And if you think of that, there's even more rights holders. And so for that reason, we kind of have to be really thoughtful of, access and putting things online. Most of this is driven by the Warhol copyright. So because of this, the solution before our dam was like to be super restrictive. You have to go through somebody to get permission to put things online to make sure you have the correct crediting, copyright statement, and you're doing it in the right format. So, it wasn't always the best solution, but it is what it was. So before the dam, the way we kind of found things was our naming convention, which was an accession number and then some kind of image use code to know if it was the master TIFF, an internal JPEG, or a public file, which could be ready to go on the web. It was all color corrected and good to go. We had no embedded metadata, no descriptive metadata. So, everyone in this room knows why that's problematic. We had approximately 65,000 assets, and that's duplicating because I'm including the master TIFF and then the JPEG renditions together in that number. So for these reasons, when it came time for us to get a dam, we were already way past due. It was getting in the way of how we were doing things. So we were fortunate enough to secure a grant to kind of help kickstart this process, which I think was one of the big reasons why we were able to do this. But we were past due because if you think of all the assets you have that weren't tied to an accession number, like, where were you storing them? They're being created by different departments. They're being created for different projects, publications, education, and they languish in these shared folders, which I know you all have, which we commonly refer to as the chaos files. You see things like marked, final, color-corrected version in these files. They have really generic titles. I found things, so as I mentioned before, we had this large archival collection of over 500,000 objects, and we have a very small staff, so it wasn't all cataloged. So, if it's not cataloged in TMS, you're not going to see it, but we need this file for a publication. So it gets some kind of weird thing, gets tucked into a file and is never seen again. So much duplicate work, because maybe we were digitizing things twice. We were more than ready. And then as the other thing I kind of mentioned before, we have tons of intellectual property rights issue. In addition to copyright, there's personality rights because Elvis, Maryland, they have celebrity rights. Campbell's are trademarked, even though Warhol didn't have to follow, and he was making new art. We're not artists, we're a nonprofit, so we have to be respectful of trademarks and other things. So because of this, assets were highly restricted, even to staff. So, certain people, publications, marketing had a little access, but, the artist educators who are trying to do lesson plans or something, they always had to funnel through the rights department, which was just slowing things down. And finally, it was 2015. We're building apps. We're trying to do more innovative things on the web. We're trying to keep pace with everyone else. We were ready for something to kind of enable more innovative digital projects. We needed a source of, we call it our dam now, the source of truth for digital assets, and then the database is the source of truth for collections data. So we were just, by this point, we were ready. For implementation, everybody who's thinking about getting a dam or already has one has done this process of you Google, what should I be considering? Because it's really nerve-wracking. It's a big decision. So one of the things we actually kind of thought about early was proprietary or open source. We actually, at the time, at the museum, we had somebody who was really into open source. And this is also where I mentioned that we're in the unique position that we're one of 4 Carnegie museums of Pittsburgh. Our IT is centralized, and a lot of the great people that helped me with this project are in this room right now. So in addition, could this be something that all 4 museums use was something we had to consider. But because we had the grant, we kind of jumped ahead and kind of started this process. And we're like, all right, we'll dive in, and then hopefully the other museums can benefit from the lessons we learned. So when looking at proprietary and open source, we had somebody who really wanted to do open source, and then we thought about it for a good 5 minutes. We're like, no, we just don't have the resources. It just would have been too much for us to do. And because we had this grant money, we went with proprietary. And then we did the thing of stakeholder consultation. A dam only works as good as the people who are using it. If nobody's using it, it's not going to work well. So I met with all the departments, talked about the types of digital assets they had, what kind of access they needed to collection images, how the dam could help their workflow, and all these other needs. So at the end of this really long consultation process, we ended up choosing NetX, which has forever ruined my ability to spell the word next, but it's been really great. We went with self-hosted behind our firewall because of kind of the copyright restrictions. We wanted it to be something that was really secure to start with, and then maybe explore opening that up later. So right now it's self-hosted behind our firewall. We have an automatic one-way sync from TMS where the data, that all the great work that our catalogers had done is now flowing to NetX and connecting to our collections images so we can embed metadata, which is really fantastic. And one thing we really liked about NetX is it had a lot of workflow automation and permission controls. So one of the big things we used is I could now, for all our collections images, set up these pre-approved download sizes. So the Andy Warhol Foundation approves for us to post images on the web with the correct crediting at a certain pixel resolution, 475 pixels, longest edge. But now our staff, they're able to they're posting on social media. They don't have to come through the rights department. They can just download and get the captions. We have a way to automate that with NetX where they can just get the correct caption right away as long as the data in the DAM is good. So that was really great, and it has actually been really changing for like our daily workflow. And then it has some workflow automation. So some things are like really sensitive. If you think of like some Warhol works, they're maybe not for, something you would put on your website, or things that we have like known Elvis's estate is really restrictive. So Elvis is kind of a little bit more restrictive than the other assets. So we can just automatically flag those things in NetX. And then it has an approval process. So say somebody wants to do a publication, they want to make a brochure or a flyer, they select the assets, and then that just routes directly to the rights manager, me, and then they write the description of what they want to do, and I can just approve it right there and then give them the TIFFs to download immediately, which is really streamlined things. So everyone so far has been, pretty happy. Like, as you can see, from where we were to where we are now, it's a big deal. I'm glad Dan kind of talked about this as well. Everyone has their challenges and struggles with implementation. For us, one of the biggest opportunities, I'm going to talk about something that actually went really well for us. We were starting from scratch with metadata. So we had never done like anything, never even tried to map to any standards. And because of this, and because of some of the capabilities and of NetX to really be flexible and work with us, as far as like creating metadata and assigning metadata, we were able to kind of rebuild things from the ground up. Certain fields for collections images were going to be mapped from TMS with the one-way data sync, and then as best as we could, we mapped these to Dublin Core. This part, maybe isn't the most elegant or the greatest, but again, we're trying to stick to standards because standards are important. And then we could have all our other custom fields. So there's some NetX administrative fields which trigger certain things to happen. And then we talked to all the departments about what data do you need to capture, what do you need to know about these assets. And we did this in mind of planning that phase 1 would be collections images going into this, and then phase 2 would be departmental working files. So kind of like check boxes to indicate something's safe to be published on the web. Or a big one is we're trying to be a more accessible museum. So we're doing image descriptions for people who are low or have no sight. And we need to store that data somewhere. So it's going to be stored in NetX because somebody does all this work to do a good image description. And then now that data can be stored there. And then we have periodic review of these fields to make sure they're still useful, they're still using them. I don't know how well this is going to translate, but this was the spreadsheet we made up. And it had the attribute name, the description of what it would be. Anything you see in blue is coming directly from TMS. Anything in red is a NetX administrative field, which I tell people do not touch, please. And then anything in white was kind of a working field that we made. And I have examples of fields, if it maps to Dublin Core, what the TMS field name is, and then the type of field. And this working document was like, we had several meetings and like we got together to make sure everyone, knew what these titles meant. Like, what does, media mean? Is that, it's coming from TMS, or what does subject mean? Actually, I think we got rid of subject because it wasn't very meaningful. This is actually probably an old iteration of it. So it was just really great to bring everyone together in a room to figure out what was useful and what was working. So if you do have a chance to implement your own DAM, I highly recommend getting together and choosing your metadata fields a really collaborative process, because if nobody uses them, they're not useful. So finally, again, because I'm the new kid on the block, I'm going to talk very aspirationally about our hopes and dreams for phase 2. So we consider phase 1 complete because the collections images are in there and they have data. So the biggest thing for phase 2, and again, my IT guys are in the crowd, so I hope they're not cringing too much about what I have planned, is to start ingesting departmental working files and other born digital works, because again, those chaos files still exist for other projects, even though it's gone away for collections images, they're still there. We're still doing a lot of redundant work, taking up a lot of excessive space. And then for me, the big thing is using DAM to help streamline the IP rights management, kind of set up flags, our IP information. It could be structured data like this, who has the copyright? Are there additional rights concerns like personality rights, trademarks? If it's this photographer, then we know absolutely you can't use it for anything. If it's this photographer, maybe it can flow into a pool where our social media marketing people, education can pull the assets and use them freely, because the relationships we have with different rights holders vary of what we can and can't do. And then have the DAM serve as a source of truth for collections image assets, meaning if we do any kind of app development or a new website, that it would pull straight from the DAM. This is a little bit further off. And then the big and scary one is that Andy Warhol, in addition to being, making paintings, sculptures, and he also did a lot of films, which we own the copyright to. So we're very excited to use it. So right now we're in a big partnership with the Museum of Modern Art to digitize all the Warhol films. It's going to be massive amounts of data, and it's going to be stuff that's going to need to be, organized. It's going to be important to have great metadata and to make it accessible. So that's a little bit further down the line, but we're always kind of thinking on the horizon of what's coming up. So that's basically it for DAM at the Warhol.
Now over to Urban, Professor Urban.
Good morning, everyone. So, hi, I'm at the Corning Museum of Glass. I'm relatively new at the Corning Museum of Glass, and we're actually in the process of not DAM 2.0, but 3.0. We had started with Cumulus many, many years ago. And then in about 2010, we switched over to MediaBin, which now has become the rust bucket in the driveway, which is sort of partly propped up on some cinder blocks. But we're still using it and depending on it in some ways. So this is our current environment. Is we have MediaBin, and we have this sort of complex set of transactions that happen. There's sort of an automatic sync of data from our MIMSI collection management system. But we also have materials from our library, but all of that material isn't directly synced. It's hand copied from the catalog record into MediaBin. And then MediaBin is the source of images for our Drupal site and what we call our collection browser. But the collection browser also has independent syncs with both MIMSI and the Voyager data. So all of that stuff comes together, but as you can see, there's sort of pipes going all over the place. If we look at what's in our MediaBin asset management system, actually almost half of it is stuff from our library, and only a small part of it is from our object collections, which is not surprising, right? You take 5 or 6 shots of an object, but if I digitize a 600-page book, it's a lot more assets by number, even though they're probably somewhat equivalent number of works. We've also had a growing collection of materials from our marketing and communications department. So this is actually a tree graph, so these are all size representations, that documents the life of the museum. So our programs, events, we have musical performers come, and we have hot glass shows that happen on a daily basis at the museum. And then there's a small section of the archives. And you can kind of see how it's grown over the years, and it's grown at different paces. But at the same time, as MediaBin sort of bounced around among a number of different departments and who was really responsible for it, things started slipping through the cracks. And so there hasn't been the investment in the infrastructure of what is running MediaBin. So people have now started going outside. They've gone fugitive. So there's about a 15 terabyte backlog of library digitization materials. There is another 10 terabytes of video. We produce 126 new videos every year, in addition to doing multiple live streams every week, particularly in our peak season. If you're interested in hearing more about that, my colleague Mandy Kritzik is talking today at 1:15. And the marketing communication department also stopped using MediaBin in about 2015 when we opened our new contemporary wing because MediaBin was too slow, not responsive. The question about like how many things are in the bucket and can you lift that bucket became more and more of a problem. So we went shopping and we selected Piction as our new dam. And so I say this is our aspirational environment because we are still in the process of phase 1, which is first of all, migrating all the materials from MediaBin and then rebuilding those connections. And part of what we're imagining is that rather than having all those pipes going in different ways to our website, that Piction will sort of be the funnel in which things come from each of those individual systems. And then through the Piction API, we'll eventually set up a conversation with the Drupal site. We're also hoping Piction will be the point where people can get at it from their desktop in the way that they're working. So using some of the document management modules of being able to select things and put them into Office documents, or for our creative team through the Adobe stuff. We also have an exhibition server of Piction, which right now is driving an IDEUM table that we installed in the spring. And I can talk questions about that more. So I've been thinking a lot about the DAM maturity model, and I think it's been really helpful to think about where we are. And it's also always a great opportunity to deploy my favorite William Gibson quote, which is, "The future is here, it's just not very evenly distributed." And I think that's true within our departments. So I think, our collections data is really good, our library data is really good. But partly because of a lot of transformation and staffing in our marketing communications department, they've kind of fallen off the wagon. So we have a lot of work to be able to do to bring that back up. And I don't know how well you can read this all the way in the back, but these are all of these sort of dimensions of the DAM maturity model. So I just tried to map where we sort of stand. We have a really great IT department, and they are thinking a little bit more about what we've done in terms of provisioning the infrastructure for Piction and how we're thinking about storage into the future. Right now, it's all internal in our own storage array. And we actually had a lot of those things for MediaBin. We had the mapping of all the metadata tables and stuff like that. But it wasn't necessarily always being used, and so we're trying to rethink about what that model is. So we're thinking the way Dan is about a sort of central core model. But I'm also new to the organization, so I'm trying to work through all those relationships about where are the things that we are malleable and where can we shape this a little bit more going forward, and how can we develop the right kind of documentation. This whole process has also raised a lot of questions about how do we do lifecycle management. So what is an asset that should be in the system? When does it stop being an asset and maybe should go away? Or maybe when it's not your asset anymore, and when is it something that gets transferred to our sort of institutional archive and it's no longer the responsibility of like the marketing and communication department. And that's, I think, some of the stuff, if you look at that growth chart, is sort of like, well, okay, is this sustainable into the future, or do we need to start thinking smarter about where we're going, and how do we apply some different ways of appraising what it is that's in the asset management system, and maybe in the future start thinking about, well, what's a digital preservation model where things now start going through that filter of, well, we don't really need this anymore as a working file, but this thing actually really documents something important. We bring guest artists, and those are becoming the record of how they work and how they create their art. Those are things that are going to be part of our long-term collection. But those other things, maybe we can start trying to think about appraising those or deaccessioning them, or putting them into some other glacial storage and getting them out of the dam if we do want to come back to them later. Thanks.
Peter Duker from National Gallery.
You guys should all stretch. It's a very crowded room, and everyone's
It
been
is. It's
very
hot,
quiet
too.
and patient. This is impressive. There's a fan. So, oh, okay. I will. And this thing is, I don't know. We'll see how we do on the volume. In the back row, just wave if I fade off. Let me do. Okay, good? All right. So I'm Peter Bueker from the National Gallery of Art in Washington. This is the Shasta Dam in California under construction. I'm going to talk dams for the future. And I'm excited because it lets me make a lot of dam jokes. Or dam puns, sorry. So I really love this conference theme, this idea of looking back is something that museums, we do really well. We tend to be nostalgic and we think about things. And it's been fun to think about DAM over the years and how we've been doing it. But the future, right? We can't be too nostalgic. We can't be too hung up on what we're doing. And we have to move forward. So I've kind of constructed this around those two ideas. I also have a cold, so if I'm hearing feedback, so just let me know. So we started this 2005. We started an Extensis portfolio. How many of you were around at MCN back in those days, like 2005, 2006? Some of you, some hands. Extensis was the big vendor back then, right? Lots and lots of museums were running portfolio. It was a very popular platform. They've moved away from the museum market, somewhat unfortunately, but we've stuck with them over the years. We have pretty much the same setup now that we had 12 years ago? Oh my goodness. Extensis portfolio, Apple Xserve. Yeah, no one has one of those anymore. We've got RAID storage, MySQL PHP for the technical folks, bidirectional integrations. 2007, we added another installation of portfolio based off MS SQL for additional departments. So that's sort of our history. This is before they let me, they took away my copy of Illustrator. And I used to do diagrams like this. They said, Peter, much too much green. So that's just some historic documentation. You know, one of the cool things about our DAM is that we've been able to do cool things, which is we've built a lot of integrations and we've done a lot of customizations. Maybe one of the less good things from our IT standpoint is this is custom PHP. This is things like AppleScript. Whoops, still works. So my staff looks at me every time I say this, but I'm like, wow, I can't believe that still runs. I'm always sort of surprised. But it all runs really well. And I open up these files and I go, I have no idea what I was doing back then. So DAM today at the institution, it's essential. It's really amazing. So I'm getting ready to come to MCN and I started getting emails from our staff that portfolio wasn't working, that something was wrong with the server. And I just take it for granted how, you know, everyone stops dead in the tracks. And I was like, oh, it's no problem. We're just out of disk space. Like, just don't put any assets in the system. We're fine. I'll deal with it and come back. Well, that's not really a great way to run your DAM. If I'm not there to delete files, then we're in trouble. So we've got 740,000 assets in Extensis portfolio. I mean, they would pass out if they heard that. 13 active DAM programs, which are basically catalogs. We have 500,000 just in imaging alone. In 2017, this is incredible, 24,000 new and replacement images. So much churn, we changed the specs, right? Our old spec for the web, 2,000 pixels long dimension. Now, as many as you can get. Our maximum web file is 2 gigs. So we're running that all through the DAM. So we're replacing things all the time. And critical workflows, really important. Lots of asset delivery, feeding websites, NGA images, the public websites. As I said, for many reasons, it's time to move on. So this is what we want to move to. This is the completed Lake Shasta Dam. So also a very refreshing soda. Dams to EDAM. So how do we do this? The nice thing about the gallery is that we've always known that portfolio was an interim solution. So we've been talking about this for many years, and we had a lot of time. And for all of you, that's the most critical step. At the very beginning is figure out what's missing, what do you want to do, what's realistic. Scope is huge. When you start talking DAM, it gets very pie in the sky. Oh, it should do this and this and this. And then if you actually look at the marketplace, most of the products don't do those things. You really have to be disciplined about setting up what is realistic for a DAM and what are the things that are going to be outside of the system that you may need to build with other applications. Don't be nostalgic. Hard for me. I love our DAM. I'm very happy with it. But it's easy to get attached to it. There's things we could do better, obviously. And the risk of inaction, that's huge. Unsupported. Our portfolio version we're on hasn't been supported by 4 years. We can't do any OS updates because all of our customizations get wiped out. Users move on. You know, they want newer technology. I see Dropbox everywhere. I'm going, hey, wait a minute. That's what portfolio is for. So one of the things that we did was kind of set up, what's our mission statement? What is the EDAM? This Enterprise Digital Asset Management System. What does that really mean? And the goal for our EDAM was I'm not going to read all of these words, although I have 280 characters now. It's exciting, right, on Twitter? But in bold, I've kind of called out the main thing. So first off, centralized repository. We want everyone in the institution to be able to participate. I'm in imaging, so we do collection photography. We've got a very active horticulture program. They have lots of documentations of plants, very different metadata model, very different considerations. Architecture, engineering, building plans, things like that. Registrar, sculpture, we have instructions on how to put sculptures together. Those things are all important, all very different challenges. We want one place for all of those assets. Services, I can't emphasize that enough. How are you helping people? We're trying to get our staff to be able to do their jobs more efficiently. That's what I'm here for. So we're a service. The dam is a service. So we want to assist. We want people to be able to use this to put in their media types, not just images anymore, right? So we're not just audio, video, all sorts of stuff that's emerging. We're not building a document management system, though. That's out of the realm, and I think that's important to consider. It's not for personnel records and things like that, but it is media assets. And then the last point, self-service. That's been one of the biggest changes. When we started in digital all those years ago, people wanted help. They wanted to come to us for a file, and we would give them a PowerPoint file. Now they want to go in, they want to browse, they want to download things on their own. So it's a really big shift at my institution towards people who just want to help themselves to things. So how can we let all of these departments get their assets stored, managed, and then available to other staff? Okay, so some requirements, I'm going to kind of blow through some of these. These are all common sort of things that you're going to want. Obviously, web interface, right? We have a client now that has to be installed and maintained. Usability, very important to us. Can people use this thing? Can they open up a browser window and figure it out on their own? API, obviously, it needs to be able to talk to other systems. Permissions and security, we have all sorts of assets in these things. Some things are going to be available, some things aren't. And then true media asset management, so video, audio, stills. Vendor selection, I'm sure a lot of you have gone through this. We spent a lot of time on this. It's very important. We really were looking at requirements. The DAM market is weird. There's a lot of products out there. A lot of them are very similar. Some sound really cool, but you have to, again, be practical. For us, we were looking at I was looking at DAM products from Sweden. Oh, this is really cool. They have no US sales force. They have no museum clients. That's not really going to help us out. If we pick this product and no one in the museum field is using it, we don't have that community, and they're not going to know our market, and they may pull out. We don't know. So we really emphasize past performance. Are they working with museums? Do they understand cultural heritage? Can they deliver on the requirements? A lot of vendors say, sure, they'll just check. You do a spreadsheet, and you send all your requirements, and they just put a yes all the way down. You have to hold them accountable to that. Is it in the product? Is it in the core thing, or are they building something custom for you? They're building something custom for you, and they do a next release, it's gone. So that's a risk. I should have the URL up here. So many NetX clients. That's what we ended up with is NetX. So many museum clients, which is great. So we've joined this great community, and we're really excited. So some stuff about the implementation, which is, I think, important. The plan was to be at MCN this year and say it's up and running. It was going to be a 12-month project. We made the award last year. It was going to be ready in fall of 2017. We made a decision after the contract award that, hey, the world is changing, and we really need to think about cloud services, web services. Are we going to host this thing in our data center and buy a bunch of storage, which is what we're running into now, which is every month I run out of disk space and have to delete something, which is, if you're an asset manager, that's kind of a tough choice. Like, what goes? So no, the decision was probably at this era, the thing to do is put it up in the cloud. So our CIO said, hey, no on premises. We're going to put this all in the cloud, which sounds very romantic, right? The cloud. This is the real life cloud. It's just a box with no windows in a field somewhere. It's a data center. This is an actual Amazon data center. So implementation take two. We said, okay, we're going to stop the DAM project. We're going to figure out a cloud vendor, sort that all out, and then we'll move forward. And what we encountered with that is We're not hosting with NetX, so I think it's really important to think about who owns your assets and where you're putting them. So we're actually technically self-hosting in the sense that we're doing a contract with Amazon and we're providing S3 storage and all that, and NetX is going to install into that. We're not paying NetX to install this on Amazon. So if we change vendors, which we probably will in a few years, that's the reality, we still have our assets, we still manage that. If we switch to a different cloud provider, if we go to Azure or something like that, we'll take our assets with us. So as you can see, 12-month project, 16 months, I don't know anymore. So a couple weeks ago, it was looking like 24 months. I was getting depressed. I think we're back down to 19. That's good news. We've gone from fall of 17, winter, spring, back to spring. Okay, so we're down currently at spring. So that's great. So final thoughts, just some things from the implementation. I think the cloud experience has really emphasized, I know these are all cliches, but my goodness, it really makes a difference. Get good people working on your project. Get people who are invested in it. Focus on results. There's so many setbacks that you're going to encounter. It's really, I'm not really a cheerleader, but now my job is, just keep smiling. We're fine. Everything's fine. We'll be okay. There's a lot of that. Any project, this is a massive undertaking. You can't neglect that. We're really fortunate at the gallery. I've got 2 full-time DAM specialists who are awesome working on this. We've got great support from IT. We have a whole dedicated project manager in IT who's helping to coordinate all those bits that I don't know. Really helpful, and lots of other staff throughout the gallery. So get that team together, figure out what it's going to take, be on the same page, focus on the end goal. By the way, Google image search for people shaking hands. You will not be disappointed. It's quite fun. Really turned out nicely. So uncertainty, didn't know. It's hard to plan for a project like this. A DAM's on-premises installation is pretty straightforward. DAM in the cloud is, who knows? It's all new. I mean, we just, you see all these advertisements, but installing on S3 is not installing on Rackspace. It's tricky. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. We lost 30 days trying to figure out remote access, right? We just couldn't get that right. We still lose time to that. Things like that are going to have surprises. So you need to plan for that flexibility, which is really hard when you're writing a contract, obviously. So you want that contract to not be, you want it to be concrete, but you need some flexibility in there. And that's, again, getting a good vendor or implementation provider who's going to work with you and understand your culture. I'm with the federal government, things are slow, right? So we go to our vendors and say, things are going to be slow, you need to plan for that. We are not going to be as responsive as you might expect. So that's why I say vendor is partner. It's not just the supplier, right? So you are, if we'd gone with that Swedish DAM provider, we'd be on our own. That's not good. With NetX, we've been really fortunate. They've been understanding. They've worked with museums. Most importantly, and final thought is, be prepared to change again. I think that we would love to think that we're all going to be on the same platform. We're all wearing Piction badges. I don't know what badges we're going to be wearing in 10 years, when we come in. I don't know what the future holds. I do think that the cloud is definitely something that you want to consider. But just be aware of that. Your assets are really important. And it's kind of a daunting thought that we've got to keep these, when I started doing this all those years ago, I didn't really think about, we got to keep these things forever. It's tough. There's a lot of pixels floating around out there. And so we got to be good stewards of them. All right. This is our team. Thank you.
Okay, we have a few minutes of questions. I have a question for you first. So who has a DAM right now? So a lot of people. Okay, good. Who's looking for a new one? Okay. I saw the guy from NetX scan the room. So, question.
Yeah. So we're actually, I'm in the middle of a migration right now. We literally finished install the day before I left for this conference. We're moving to resource space. We were on Media Beacon, which was garbage as far as I was concerned. And so since y'all are in the middle or have done migrations before or whatever, I was wondering if anybody had any tips or pitfalls to avoid in setting stuff up. One thing about resource space, doesn't have a traditional folder structure. So I've been I'm trying to debate whether or not I want to create a fake folder structure, because folders are kind of really just metadata in their own way if you think about it abstractly enough. So any advice would be great.
Yeah, well, we looked at resource space also, and And that the folder question was the folder question was a problem for us, and we wound up doing we tried it out for a year, and we wound up doing quite a bit of customization, which turned out to be expensive. So, in the end, we decided just to keep what we were doing. Maybe some of you guys have some ideas.
I think that it's one just general thought too is just don't overthink it. I mean, we start getting it into use as quickly as possible is the most important thing. If we spent a year with the department working on file names. Why, right? Just get in there and you'll figure. It sounds challenging, but portfolio, the way we've used it over the last 12 years is we've built it up over time, and you'll make mistakes, and you're gonna work with the limitations of the product. You'll figure it out.
I would also say that, particularly for all that marketing stuff and I'll be talking more about this tomorrow at 8:45. I'm trying to move them towards thinking about more metadata approaches and also thinking about implementing some lightweight controlled vocabularies that essentially do what the folder categories do. And that's going pretty well. I've got some buy-in from people who are responsible for it in marketing communications, but I hope in the future that will allow us to be more flexible. But it's also something that I hope we can maintain over time. So it's not just right now. You'll see tomorrow. It's like how many folders deep do you want to go into this inception world of meaningful folder names with no metadata on the file? So we're trying to flip that around.
We're actually looking at expanding the use of our data for other kinds of media, and you mentioned specifically that you're not using it to track documents. I wondered if you could elaborate on why.
It was just a scope issue. I mean, when you get into document management, there's very different requirements for version control. If you're talking about things like personnel and curatorial files, it's just a whole different thing. We will handle PDFs and things like that, but we're going to put materials that are related to the art object only. It was just otherwise too bogged down.
I want to add to that we're actually thinking about doing some document management, but we're a much smaller institution. We have a much smaller staff, and we're trying to be selective about it. Where the things we'd have the greatest return for, the things that we're losing the most time. Like for us, it's gallery labels and interpretive text because people have done them over the years, and then it gets lost. But it's a lot of good research and scholarship. So we are kind of looking into that for our phase 2. But that said, we haven't done it yet. So I don't know how. Yeah.
And I'd say we're sort of in the same place where, as I said at the end, it's sort of about thinking about policies. And one of the things we've run into is that we have a 10-year-old records retention policy that doesn't talk about digital things at all. So we're now starting a conversation about, right, when is something a record? When is it an asset? And some of those things like conservation reports or the end result of an exhibit research process, do those things get rolled up and put somewhere? Is it the dam or is it somewhere else?
And it all depends on how much total content you have overall and what your staff's like, how many systems you can support. So every situation is a little unique.
The question is maybe for Peter, who mentioned that specifically, but maybe for everybody else too. So, well, kudos for owning your assets. That's critical, I think. Your data is yours. My question is about IT workforce management. So you mentioned that you have a team of dedicated staff, that's dedicated to the DAM's transition, who are probably very, very busy now, and they will be very busy during the AWS migration. How do you foresee this workforce being distributed when the system becomes stable and needs less, let's say, maintenance, and you can probably defer to the vendor more than your own?
We have a pretty lean staff for dams. For the size, we have 2 full-time people working on dams. In IT, they're more flexible, so we have a project manager, but she will move on to other things. I think it'll be interesting to see. Right now, our dam requires very little IT intervention and maintenance, and I know that this product is going to require a lot more time, so it'll be interesting. That's a good consideration. We'll have to look at it.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
Can you talk about the decision to go cloud-based?
I was really fortunate because it wasn't a decision, it was just a directive. So when you're in the federal system, it's really fun because it was like everything's on premises, cloud preferred, cloud first, cloud only. So that was kind of the way, and I think that's just the way of the future. I'm outside of my concern there is cost, right? It's very expensive, but it just makes sense, when you really look at it for a system. We feel big, but we're not huge, and we don't have the IT capacity to really, and so cloud takes away a lot of that overhead. So I think it's sensible. We'll see how it goes.
I think everybody's dying for a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming.